Welcome back to Weekly Briefing. Let's dive in. The purge of Trump allies continues. MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell says the FBI swarmed him and seized his cell phone Tuesday evening while he was at a Hardee's restaurant drive-thru in Minnesota. Lindell was returning from a hunting trip and broke on the news on Instagram Live.
The FBI, you're going to hear this, and you're probably already hearing it in the news. The FBI came after me and took my phone. They surrounded me at a Hardee's and took my phone that I run all my business, everything with. They could have just, what they've done is weaponize the FBI. It's disgusting. I don't have a computer. Everything I do have that phone, everything was on there, and they told me not to tell anybody. Here's an order not to, don't tell anybody. Okay, I won't.
All right, so as General Counsel for Personnel Policy Operations under the Trump administration, we have Andrew Kloster to weigh in. Isn't it unusual to seize an entire cell phone? Shouldn't they have just requested certain items on the phone rather than seizing the device itself?
Yeah, you know, I've talked with former FBI folks, and one of the interesting, there's so much going on here. It's a circus. You know, yeah. No FBI for immigration, but we'll get the MyPillow guy. Great. But, you know, typical practices, when you know someone's got an attorney, you know, you would typically go to the attorney, but they're springing this on people. You've got people out in the street in their underwear. They're going after everybody. It really does look like a wide dragnet, a fishing expedition to get these phones of anybody within 1,000 yards of Trump, not because they have anything specific, but because they're just trying to fish or find some inconsistency or some dirt or something. So I think it's frankly ridiculous. The entire J6 commission is something that should be taken a look at in the new Congress if things go the way we think that they're going to go. They're really trying to, I think, criminalize dissent and also scare people from investigating or protecting our elections at the state level too.
Now, the net by which the FBI has framed their seizure of this cell phone is that the FBI agents served him a warrant related to Lindell's ties to Tina Peters. This is a Colorado County clerk in Mesa County. Peters is currently under indictment on state charges related to a scheme to download data from election equipment after the 2020 presidential contest. So when you listen to that, that sounds like a legitimate request, but tell us how it's not. Yeah,
so, you know, this is a state investigation, and I think one thing we'll find out in the years to come is the amount of coordination between the feds and the states to kind of help allow people to operate in darkness. The win, I think, in Youngkin's win in Virginia is largely, I think, attributable to having a lot of eyes on the ground. They don't want eyes on the ground. They want to scare people who are investigating. They want to scare clerks, many of whom have been in these jobs for, you know, dozens of years. Clerks are the authorized officials to access election data. They have the right to, under state law, and you know it's different in different states, but they have the right to look at this stuff.
All right, so we asked the lawyer on the panel. Let's ask the judge on the panel. Judge Matt O'Brien, Director of Investigations at Immigration Reform Law Institute. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Your take on what is happening here. Is the seizure of a cell phone overly broad here?
Well, my question is, where's the judiciary in this, and who are the judges and magistrates who are looking at these applications, and why is it that a judge who has a guaranteed appointment for 8 years like a magistrate or a lifetime appointment like a federal judge doesn't feel they're in a position to go, no, this is a bridge too far. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the connection here. I mean, that's what you do as a judge. When I was on the bench, my job was to read the law and apply it, and I had discretion in doing that. And what seems to be going on here is that the current administration is seeking out people who, on the bench, who they know have established political affiliations and a record of ruling as activists from the bench in order to accomplish policy objectives. And so the really scary part of this is that the filter between the people and the government, which in this case is supposed to be the judiciary branch, is failing. It's not working at all.
So they're fishing for jurisdictions in order to execute their fishing expeditions.
Yes. It's worse because we're also seeing them outsourcing it to these left-wing groups or certain hack attorneys that will, you know, they don't have the full staffing to go after this. They still have crimes that maybe they're not prosecuting the crimes, but they've still got crimes they're supposed to be prosecuting. So these people will write up an entire subpoena or whatever and pass it off, to law enforcement. We're seeing a lot of outsourcing, Wisconsin, Georgia, elsewhere.
And it seems to be a situation where if there's a hint that something that's referenced in the statute might have occurred, the warrants are issuing, when the standard is there probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed? And that doesn't appear to be being observed.
Certainly seems like a pattern these days.
It's not a crime for a clerk to look at election data. It's their job. So criminalizing that is just trying to chill any kind of security.
Right. That's probably the biggest crime of all right now. Inflation stays red hot. Headline CPI rose 0.1% month over month in August, marking an 8.3% increase in August. That very same day, the White House launched a celebration of the signing of the inconveniently named Inflation Reduction Act.
Exactly 4 weeks ago today, I signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, a single most important legislation passed in the Congress to combat inflation and one of the most significant laws in our nation's history, in my view. I said it then, and I'll keep saying it. With this law, the American people won and special interests lost.
All right, let's take this discussion over to Greg Wisher. As Vice President of Government Affairs at Westwind Elements, you are very familiar with optics, with messaging, with lobbying efforts. Your take on that very untimely speech?
Right. So to put it bluntly, that was quite on the nose. Obviously, inflation is soaring through the roof, and to have this act be called the Inflation Reduction Act is not accurate, to say the least. And to also look at the stock market drop that occurred right afterwards, you can see
during the speech while he was talking.
Yeah. So we see that happening in real time. But again, they call it the Inflation Reduction Act. But from a business perspective, where we really see the impact of inflation is the difficulty for trying to line up our supply chain, trying to find the lowest cost suppliers and trusted suppliers. We want to be able to go to American companies, source from American companies, but when you have these soaring prices, it makes it very difficult for companies to have that be a prime focus when they're trying to keep the people with their company hired when you're dealing with all these various costs, and it really complicates the supply chain. So that's where I see it from a business perspective is.
And he barely mentioned supply chain issues in talking, which has been a significant driver of the inflation that we're seeing today. Government spending and supply chain disruptions. We barely heard anything about that in this speech.
Right. So you're really seeing now coming to the fore the consequences of reckless monetary and fiscal policy. And businesses, we want predictable, stable environments to work with. We are not receiving that right now in the United States.
Real wages are down, too. I mean, we're seeing wages are down. And I see my left-wing friends, like, how they're trying to spin this. They're like, well, actually, if you look at the second-order derivative, the rate of inflation increase is down, so the curve is good. It's like, I don't care what the curve is. People care what the prices are, and prices are still going up.
It's hilarious that he said special interest loss, too, because it seems like every piece of legislation that Democrats pass is targeted at special interests, their particular special interests, and funding them. And I'm not sure how spending on Democrat special interests gets us out of a recession.
And where we really also see this beginning to hurt is working class, because while gas prices may be down, energy costs for natural gas for heating homes is up. Food prices are also up. So that's where we really see this hurting. It's not the wealthy elite that are going to be feeling this bite. It will be the working class.
Oh, no, it's funny. They were saying that, wages are up, gas is down, but everything else was, eggs are up 40%.
Gas always goes down at the end of the summer. At the end of the summer, gas always goes down. So I don't know how they're claiming credit for that. It's not like they're permitting more refineries. It's not like they're stopping the attacks on oil and gas.
Well, here's something they won't take credit for. A report shows the Border Patrol chief say under oath that an internal U.S. Customs and Border Protection guidance memo from May was unprecedented. That memo instructed border agents to release illegal immigrants into the U.S. in anticipation of Title 42 ending. So, Judge, what do you make of that?
It's absolutely mind-boggling. President Trump, when he was running for office, said if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. This is the first step to not having a border. And what's really galling about it is Title 42 was convenient because of the pandemic. It was properly invoked, and it provided a quick and easy basis for getting people who are unlawfully here, encountered at the border, out of the country. But the fact is that you don't need that. Section 1182F of the Immigration and Nationality Act gives the president authority to set all kinds of restrictions in cases of emergency on who can enter the U.S. and how long they can stay. And that was recently affirmed and clarified in Trump v. Hawaii by the Supreme Court. So this is just evidence that the Biden administration doesn't want the country to have a border. They do want large numbers of people coming here from abroad. There's no other explanation for why you would give this kind of instruction to the Border Patrol.
Case in point is your own personal story. You were an immigration judge under Trump. You were one of the more effective ones on paper, and the Biden administration decided that they did not want you on the bench anymore.
Yeah, this
right when the backlog was piling up at its peak.
Exactly. I mean, when you have this many people over the border and the number of cases growing, why would you want to get rid of any immigration judges, but particularly the effective ones? And clearly it's because the Biden administration does not like the immigration law as it exists. But the fact is, if that's the case, we have a process for that. A constitutional republic changed the law. You can't simply ignore it because you don't like it. And this is a slippery slope because, you know, as we've seen, just talking about Mike Lindell and the FBI, it starts with immigration, it ends with the Bill of Rights and criminal law. And so this is, I think the implications for this are much more dire than most people realize.
When we return, one mineral could hold the key to national security. What that is and more. We'll be right back. Cobalt is a chemical element which is used in many different advanced technologies. A new bill, which could be introduced very soon, will look to ramp up domestic cobalt refining and have the Department of Defense acquire it through a purchase program. Greg, this is your area. Why is cobalt so important? Is it, in the grand scheme of things, important to our national security? Why?
Yes, so while you may not have heard of cobalt very much, it is important for three main reasons. One, it is corrosion resistant. Two, it is heat tolerant, and it's also magnetic. So cobalt is considered a performance enhancing element, meaning it's found in small quantities across a whole host of different technologies. Most notably, superalloys in jet engines, but also permanent magnets in the F-35 fighter jet, for example. The issue is that currently the United States is 100% reliant on both secondary scrap materials and imports for its cobalt consumption.
Wait, so to be clear, this is a material that is used, as you say, in scarce amounts, but in very imperative amounts in fighter jets and electric vehicles and things like that.
Yes, okay. It's absolutely critical, not only for the defense industrial base, but also for key emerging technologies, also for semiconductors as well. And the issue is that China controls 72% of production for refined cobalt, the material that's actually sent to these end-use manufacturers to make these advanced technologies.
And currently, the United States produces zero refined cobalt.
There is zero refineries in the United States.
And yet our need for cobalt has risen.
Yes, and it's projected to rise. For example, the International Energy Agency projects that by 2040, cobalt demand to be 6 to 30 times higher in 2040 than they are today.
That is stunning. Now, there's a metric that absolutely leaped out to me when I saw it. We've got approximately 13,000 tons of cobalt, the United States did, during the Cold War. It was in our national defense stockpile. We now only have 333 tons. Mm-hmm. China, on the other hand, has 7,700 tons in its stockpile. We are 300 to 7,000 right now, outnumbered. Yes, so why that is important is that what this bill actually would do is, one, the purchase program would go to helping to plus up the national defense stockpiles cobalt reserves. What also would do is it provide an incentive for cobalt refineries to sell to the U.S. government. That's actually a plan that was used during the Cold War for atomic products, was that the government would be a guaranteed supplier for domestic producers, would help scale up the capacity for those companies in the United States. All right, so you've been lobbying for this cause for some time now. You've been trying to get a refinery built out in Oklahoma, as I understand. What has been the biggest obstacle in laying all of this out to lawmakers and presenting this? Right, so this is actually very exciting because previously I've worked for two Republican members of Congress. But so you're familiar with what it is to maneuver through the halls of Congress? Yes, absolutely. So what makes this exciting is that there's actually support on both the Democrat and Republican side. So the Republicans see this through the angle of national security, of how China's really dominated these supply chains. Where the Democrats see it is that cobalt is necessary for their green energy dreams. So whether it's electric vehicles, battery storage for wind turbines, they see this as cobalt as being necessary, and they prefer to have it be through a domestic company like ourselves versus dealing with China, dealing with other external actors that are not very nice towards the United States, to say the least. Wow, we found it, the chimera, the one thing that both sides can come together on. It's not on children, it's not about our southern border, it's about cobalt. Cobalt. Thank you for that. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham introduced a bill which would federalize a 15-week abortion ban. Graham's decision to introduce this bill less than 2 months before a pivotal midterm election season has many wondering if this could mobilize the Democrat base. Many GOP lawmakers have argued the issue should simply be decided at the state level in the past. Andrew, your take on Lindsey Graham's timing here?
Yeah, I don't know. Lindsey has never struck me as a social conservative, but his base back home has often been snookered. I think he's a swamp creature. I'm not sure what he's doing here. Post Dobbs, and Dobbs was the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe, we've kind of seen a split in the pro-life movement, and you can kind of see who your friends and your enemies are. We've actually seen some pro-life groups lobby against heartbeat bills. It's kind of bizarre to me. So when Graham does this, you have to wonder what his game is. I'm not sure he wants to win in November. I think it's giving a live issue to the Democrats. I'm extremely pro-life. It's like my #1 issue. But, you know, we can afford to wait a little bit. And I'm just not sure that Senate leadership, we've seen McConnell come out saying we're not going to win. We've seen Graham do this. I think that they're very worried about the America First candidates on the Senate side, and they may be trying to help scuttle that. You know, he may also be trying to play to his base to gin up some donations. But I don't trust the man as far as I can
You might
spit,
be onto
so.
something there, because it's not like he has a pressing election back home.
No.
So this could well be a self-sabotaging move for the GOP.
Yeah, I don't trust him as far as I can spit.
Why do this now? Especially, I mean, we've got the border laying in ruins and millions of people coursing over it. Seems to me that all this does is tend to motivate the Democrat base, because this is an issue that they care so much about. This seems more likely to motivate Democrats to come to the polls and vote against this type of agenda than it does to inspire Republicans.
And again, most Republicans support a state-led initiative here, for states to decide, for people to vote with their feet and decide on their own.
Yeah, West Virginia just passed a very big ban. I mean, deep red areas are in the driver's seat here, and they're going to go hard. And then if there are electoral majorities of Republicans, I mean, why not raise the issue again? But right now, right before the election, as someone who's extremely pro-life, I just find this, I look at it sideways. I don't think it's appropriate. And,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Illinois will be the first state to roll out a no-cash bail program starting January 2023, sparking people to compare the law to a horror movie called The Purge. The state's Safety Act abolishes cash bail for second-degree murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, drug-induced homicide, and more. Judge, what's going on here, and will this make our communities safer?
It's not going to make anyone safer. It's going to make things much more dangerous. Bail is simple. It's a guarantee that you're going to show up for trial. And the fact is that the people who have the most to fear from the criminal justice system are the ones who are least likely to show up for trial. The other part of bail is that there are certain circumstances when a judge can decide that it's not merited, and that the person who's seeking bail either presents so much of a danger to the community or presents such a flight risk that they can be detained pending trial.
But homicide? Kidnappers?
Listen, this goes back to the Middle Ages in Britain. This makes absolutely no sense. It's a fool's errand to think that you can eliminate cash bail and have these people show up. And all this does is put people that should not be back in the community, who are dangerous predators, back on the streets. It is indeed like the Purge.
My parents just left Illinois. They just moved out of Cook County, which is Chicago. They just moved out. Crime is definitely one of the things on their mind. We're seeing thousands upon thousands of people leave these deep blue states with these Soros prosecutors, and that are having policies like this. So it's going to continue.
What is the possible, just step into their shoes. Surely they have a reasonable argument, some kind of argument for why this is somehow a good idea.
Well, it's flipping the script. And what it does is, instead of putting the emphasis on victims and using the criminal justice system for what it was designed to be, which is creating a stable society, giving a safe method for retribution and punishment against criminals, it makes the interests of the criminal defendant primary. Now, the interests of the criminal defendant are important here in the U.S., but they're not the sole interest. There's a balance between the interests of the community and the interests of the victims and the interests of the criminal defendant. This completely stands the system on its head and makes it all about the criminal defendant.
And it's the same thing, too, that we've seen with inflation as well, is that the people that are advancing fiscal and monetary policies that lead to inflation, it's the same thing that happens with these criminal acts, is the people that are actually experiencing the effects of criminality are not going to be those that are at the Hamptons. So they can simply flee to the Hamptons. They can flee to Martha's Vineyard. But the real Americans actually face the consequences of this. They feel it hard, and they're feeling it now.
That's a great point. It's yet another example of the leftist agenda harming the middle class, harming the lower classes, harming more people than themselves. Andrew Kloster, Greg Wisher, Matt O'Brien, thank you for joining. When we return, the weekly 3 Lies from the Biden White House and a possible new sponsor. We'll be right back.